Before we dive in, I want to tell you a little bit about how this episode happened and then some weird things that happened while we were recording. So I met Kimberley Lander in 2025 at Writers Conference. And I have, if you don't know, I have 3 novels out. They are inspired by my career. And Kimberley, well, she's looking to do the same at some point. Fiction, heavily inspired by her career. And I knew that when I launched podcasts again, whenever I felt like recording again, I wanted to have her on because I know she has so many interesting stories. So she came on, and if you're listening and you're not watching the video, sometimes you're going to hear her laugh and you'll hear these pauses where she just says, yeah. And it's because she's responding to my expressions. Some of the things that were coming up as she was describing her work on a particular case, it was a serial killer case. It was really hard to hear and frustrating and just maddening. So I'm making these faces. Sometimes I'm covering my mouth. I'm just like holding my mouth shut. So you can't see that, if you're listening. So there may be some weird laughter from her, pauses, stuff that just doesn't seem to add up. Well, that's why, because she was reacting to me. And if you're watching, you're going to see how I don't have a poker face. I'll never be able to play poker and win anyway. At least there's not going to be any bluffing on my part. It's terrible. And then we had a technical issue where the Wi-Fi just, whatever happened, it wasn't strong enough to keep the recording going. It wasn't loading the video anymore. It just kind of crapped out on us. So when she came back, my mic was not recording, and it was my laptop mic, which was terrible because I'm far away. So the part where we bring her back in after our technical difficulties is going to sound like a monologue because I just cut myself out of it because you can't hear me anyway. But it was so interesting that most of it I kept in so that you could hear it without having to wait for another episode to come out. And then the last thing that one of the reasons why the entire thing isn't there is because I fainted. My head didn't actually hit the desk, but I passed out, kind of. It was very strange. I think it was a combination of I hadn't been drinking enough water, a lot of stress, and then the listening. And, you can't not react really internally, but I think I was not breathing deeply. I think I was doing a lot of shallow breathing. And whatever that combination was, I almost just keeled right over. And so we quit recording after that. Other than these unusual occurrences, it's a great episode. And so again, thanks for tuning in to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives. And here we go. Welcome to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives, where we expose predators, dive into the minds of evildoers, and help you and your loved ones avoid them. I'm your host, Deborah Dobbs. I'm an author and victim advocate with a reputation for rattling cages. So go ahead and tell me, because and you're going to tell me like I have no idea, which is true. I've never seen the labs. I have no idea. I don't even know what you wear when you go to work. So just explain it, very basic terms.
Sure.
What you did, how you got into it, all that.
Okay, so my name is Kimberley Lander. I worked for 20 years at the Bexar County Criminal Investigation Laboratory in the DNA serology section. So I was a forensic scientist there. I was hired in 2003. And so, yes, I made it to 2023. So okay. I got my 2 years in. Before I worked there, so my undergraduate degree is called clinical laboratory science. It's also kind of goes by medical technology. The University of Texas San Antonio is here in town, and there's a branch they're actually affiliated with each other now, but at the time they were kind of separate schools. So it was the Health Science Center. So that's where like the nursing school, the dental school, the medical school, and then the School of Allied Health was. So my undergraduate degree, my plan was that I was going to be pre-med and I wanted to go to medical school. And then I kind of switched gears, once you've done 4 years of school, and that clinical laboratory science program was very intensive. It was a lot of credit hours, and every summer I was in summer school. I took no electives. It was just all work, and it was
Like what kind of classes?
So I had to get all of my like undergraduate prerequisites. I did those at
Right.
UTSA mostly, so a lot of biology, genetics, the normal Englishy history things. But then the ones that were in my major, so microbiology, like medical microbiology, toxicology classes, blood banking, so clinical chemistry,
Blood banking.
pathology. So like if you walk into a hospital, all of the laboratory work that's going on at the hospital, so cross matching units of blood, when you go and have your cholesterol drawn for, or a CBC, complete blood count or whatever. You have a culture done for a blood culture for, bacteria in your blood, or a CSF, spinal fluid, infection or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. That was what I was trained to do. So it was basically like the clinical side of what goes into becoming a doctor. And then the way I always thought about it was you've got like the clinical side, and then you have the nursing side, right? So you have the patient care side, and knowing how to, start an IV and give injections, and how to calculate like how much of antibiotic or a drug someone's supposed to
Yeah.
get based on weight, like a lot of that stuff. That was not my wheelhouse. But it was just very intense. I mean, it was a great program. I learned a lot. I was very well qualified to do that job when I got out of school. And I worked in that field for about 7.5 years. And then I was antsy to do something else. The hospital I worked at had a lot of people who'd been there for a long time, and they just looked miserable. And
Mm-hmm.
that trajectory looked very unhealthy, and I didn't want to do that. So I went back to school at the Health Science Center. They had a master's program by then in forensic toxicology. I am not a chemistry person. I made it through biochemistry and chemistry classes, but it is not my jam. I was
Mm-hmm.
much more like a DNA biology person, but it was the only master's degree that was available close to San Antonio, and I wasn't really in a place to move across the state or the country to take graduate school classes. So I signed up for that. I did that for about a year and a half. And then I did a rotation at the medical examiner's office in Bexar County. So San Antonio is our big city, but the county is called Bexar. It's Bexar, but it's pronounced Bexar.
One of
Um,
those many things in
yeah,
Texas that is tricky to
it's
pronounce.
that's right. It's a trick to see who's like local and who's not.
Yeah.
If when you come in and you say Bexar, we just know that you're not from here.
Yeah.
Um, and oddly enough, there was a guy that I went to high school with that was working in the DNA section of the crime lab. So I kind of had a couple of ins. Like I knew some people. The crime lab's in the same building as the medical examiner's office. So there was a job that became available in the DNA section, and I applied for it on the very last day that it was posted. And I got an interview, and I got hired, and I was super excited. So yeah, I mean, it was a phenomenal job.
So
It's
you
just,
didn't have to finish your master's. You got it and you got out of that program that you
yeah,
didn't like.
yeah. So my intention was that I was going to finish it. I kind of got basically to the part where I needed to do my research project, but by then I was training in a full-time job. That was what I wanted, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have the time really to try and work on a full-time project. And
No
again,
point. You got the job. You got a great job. So
yeah.
why? I don't know.
I kind of dropped it. They were my advisors there were really unhappy about it because it was a small program, and so the completion rate was sort of a big sticking point in keeping the program around, and I was skewing
Oh,
the stats very badly against having everyone that started the program finish, but such is life.
yeah.
So yeah, so I did most of my training was on the job training. It's a small, for as big a town or city as San Antonio is, we always had a very small lab. So it was maybe like 6, 7 analysts for a city of like 1 million people, maybe 1.25 million then. I'd have to look and see what our population
Hmm.
was back then. Um, but it wasn't overwhelming. Like we had a pretty small lab, but we were keeping up with things.
So
And
what
then,
was coming into you? Like what would come in?
okay, sure. So in the DNA serology lab, what we would work were evidence collected, usually in the course of investigating sexual assault, homicides, aggravated assault, sometimes robberies and burglaries, but basically think any criminal activity where there's the potential for somebody to leave body fluids, blood, DNA behind. And I mean, I'd like to say that we prioritized homicides and sexual assaults, but kind of in the old days, we didn't have so many sexual assaults and homicides that we weren't also working a burglary case if there was blood, somebody cut themselves on a window, or a robbery case or something. So we kind
Hmm.
of worked an assortment of things. And back then, though, the discretion of the detectives, um, like they had a lot of discretion on what they submitted to the laboratory, sort of towards the
What
end.
like what and if? Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay.
yes, yeah.
So
So
when something comes in though, because I want to back up to the lab, something comes in, what do you do? Is it like forensic files when they show,
so
it's always a short 2-second clip.
uh,
I mean, what
yeah,
do you do in there? Or some TV show,
right.
like I don't, they just
So
make it up maybe.
yeah, forensic files is great. I love forensic files because those are real labs and real like forensic scientists that they're interviewing. Sometimes they'll do a little bit of a recreation and the mood is not right. We're never
Yeah.
operating in the dark with like strange green lights and blue lights. It's not,
Yeah.
it's not like that at all.
Yeah.
Um, so so the way our lab was organized was we worked for the county, but so our leadership was not police, like the sheriff's office or police officers were not over our laboratory. In the old days, again, that was how a lot of labs were. They fell underneath a police department, but what it meant was that you had police officers in charge of scientists, and most police officers are not scientists, and so
Hmm.
there was a bit of a conflict of interest. So forensic laboratories started to move towards where they were autonomous or they were under a different jurisdiction than the police or the sheriff's office. And
I
that
would
was a
think they
big,
had like more than a conflict of interest. I can't imagine the conflict there
yes,
could be, the potential for
absolutely.
interpersonal conflict, professional conflict.
Absolutely. Yes. And there's a number of labs over the years that have had those types of scandals and problems with, an analyst trying to go over and above for a particular department or detective in particular because, they wanted to be seen as being the person who was making or breaking the case. There's a lot of forensic scientists that have a lot of ego. There's a lot of them.
Hmm.
I mean, and I don't
Hmm.
know, most of us did it for other reasons and enjoyed being behind the scenes in a laboratory far, far away. Most forensic scientists even are not excited about testifying in court, even though that's pretty much the end of all of our work. But there are some people who really like the limelight. So,
Hmm.
so we were separate and apart. Evidence collection was always done by crime scene investigators from the investigating agencies. So SAPD and the sheriff's office were our biggest, I don't want to say customers, but sort of. And they had their own units that would go to the scenes. So we were not at the scenes. That's obviously different than a lot of the shows. Um, they would submit the evidence, and then so depending on the case, we would get a little bit of information on the case. just maybe like a high level scenario of what was going on, who they believed the people involved were, how many people were involved, what kind of contact, maybe how many people were bleeding or thought to bleed. Some of this is conjecture, right? You know, you've got people leaving scenes, and obviously the suspects are not usually willing to be super forthcoming, even if they're apprehended. And a lot of times they were non-suspect cases early on. So we would do our best with the information given to us to what we would consider screening the evidence. And so that would be where we would look at the evidence for biological material first. We would use chemical, microscopic, and then some alternate light source visual exams just to kind of identify where biological material was. So if you sent me in a shirt, I'm going to look at it first, describe what it looks like, see if it's, is it dirty? Is it covered in blood stains? Is there a single blood stain? Is there a puncture, to maybe indicate like a stabbing and then blood around it? If you tell me that there's a struggle and the suspect is believed to have injured themselves, so now I'm looking for two persons' blood. So you're looking for blood, in a weird place that's away from the injury, right? So like if somebody was bleeding with their hand and grabbed the back of somebody's shirt, that might look different. And a lot of it is just sitting with the information, looking at the evidence, and trying to put yourself in the scenario that's like pitched to you, basically. And so, yeah. So, I mean, there were definitely.
I didn't know that. I didn't even know that, that.
Yeah.
So I just thought they'd be very specific, test this and test that.
Yeah.
And okay. So you have to do a lot more critical thinking.
Yes.
Than I thought, in addition to analysis and.
Yeah. It's a lot of creative thinking also, because sometimes things are really obvious. And then sometimes you have to go in a really weird direction to find the thing that the police are looking for. So I'll give you a bit of an example. This isn't something that we did at our lab, but it was presented to us at one of the meetings. Gosh, I can't remember how long ago this was. It was a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago. The DC sniper case. I don't know if you remember it was an older guy, but he was with a younger, like high school age kid, and they were just getting on hills and shooting and killing people in the DC and surrounding areas. Yeah. So we had someone who worked on that case who presented, and they were able to go back and kind of get an idea of where they were shooting from the trajectories. And one of the items of evidence that was left behind was, I think it was a note. And I can't remember now. I think it might have been an intentional note, like left for police. I don't, like.
I think so. I think
right?
I think that sounds familiar.
Yeah. So something was left behind. And so, I think they tried it for fingerprints and weren't able to find any, or if they were, it didn't match anything in the database that generated a lead. But one of the forensic analysts recognized how this paper was torn. It was not like torn out of a notebook. It was a piece of paper torn in half. Well, how do you tear a straight edge on a piece of lined notebook paper? You make the line and then you lick it and get it wet and then you tear it. And sure enough, saliva sample came back. I think.
Wow.
That's how they tied.
I've used my nail.
Yeah.
But you would be dragging okay, let me ask you that, because I'm going to be asking you all kinds of questions. Let's say you didn't lick it, but you fold the paper and you drag your finger across it a whole lot and you drag your nail across it. Would that leave DNA? So the general answer, I guess if you're sweating, yes.
The general answer is it depends. What I will say, and so the field has gotten away from the term touch DNA. We used to use that term a lot. We kind of now, it's understood more to refer to things as trace DNA when it's a very small amount of DNA. Obviously, a blood sample, a semen sample, saliva has a lot of DNA in it. You have a lot of nucleated cells, and so it's a very robust sample usually. But the technology has gotten really good so that we're able to get DNA profiles from very small amounts of DNA. that we weren't able to use, 20, 25 years ago. And like I said, for a while, we would say touch DNA. So, like if you swabbed, I don't know, I mean, a phone's not a good example. People have it up to their face a lot. But if you swabbed like the phone case, like there's not blood on this, but there's probably my DNA because I handle it all the
Hmm.
time. But it's also not necessarily there from touch. Like if I have it up against my face, it doesn't mean I touched it with my finger. And
Right.
so that's kind of why we've gotten away with that. It's trace. We call it trace DNA or
Okay.
small amounts of DNA. But it is relative. It's relative to a couple of things. It's relative to the surface type. So if you are vigorously handling the grip of a weapon, even if it's just your hand and it's not, you're not super sweaty and it's not blood or whatever, it's got the like the markings, the hash marks on it. Sorry, I'm not a firearms person, but it's patterned. It's meant to be
Oh,
grippy.
the grip,
Yeah.
like the grip of a pistol
Yes.
grip.
It's not smooth. It's meant to have
Right.
some grip to it. And so if you handle that really vigorously, especially over a long period of time, if that's your gun and you use it all the time, you're going to leave trace amounts, trace amounts, trace amounts that will cumulatively give us usually enough to get some kind of a profile from. If you walk through a room and you run your hand along the smooth surface of a door or a window, that's not going to do much. And so
Okay.
it's relative to, and okay, so the other thing that comes into play is that some people are shedders. Some people just shed DNA better than others. And sometimes there are people who spit when they talk, and sometimes there are people who probably aren't really clean. um, I feel like every lab has a person in there that's a shedder. Their DNA gets into everything. But
Really? I
yeah,
was wondering about that.
there's usually one person that's a pretty common source of contamination. Um,
Wow.
so
Can
yeah,
you get fired you're fired because you're a shedder?
well, I think there's a lot of ways to work around it now. It's funny because face masks would never have been a thing before COVID, but face masks in a DNA lab are actually a great addition to like the ways of keeping, your own DNA out of a sample. But
So you wear like you have to wear something over your hair? I would think that. I don't even cook with my hair not covered because my piece of hair will fall in there, my
yeah,
food.
yeah. I don't. We
They
didn't.
don't cover their hair? They don't put like
No, no.
caps on? No.
No.
Okay.
I mean, I would pull mine back because you never wanted your hair to like fall into the evidence and touch like a
Right.
bloody shirt or something, but it was more to protect my hair. Or so that I didn't carry anything out of the lab with me home.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay, so back
gloves.
to the saliva. Or are you still talking about trace? Or can
No,
we
I'm good.
Okay, so the saliva, this guy, he he was creative and
Right.
that's
Okay.
pretty clever.
So
Okay.
so that's what I'm saying. Like there are these times when it kind of just comes down to the imagination of the analyst or reading the case history from a victim or a complainant and 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 just imagining like what does this scenario look like, like what are the ways that these two people are going to be in contact with another, um and was that evidence collected? Hand swabs are a really good sample, maybe not always collected. Fingernail clippings and scrapings, so many times fingernail clippings were the way that we found a foreign profile, especially
Mhm.
homicide victims. You've got somebody who's struggling for their life and they very much are clawing and doing everything they can. And so fingernail clippings from a homicide victim were, yeah, if we couldn't get a profile on any of the other evidence, I mean, we almost always got the fingernail clippings pretty early in the investigation, but if we didn't, it's like, where are the clippings? We know that Emmy took them, send them in. Um,
What do you remember um I, I I I remember talking to someone whose sister worked in a lab and she quit after she said I can't it was like semen on a diaper and she's like I can't do this anymore and she
yeah,
quit.
yeah. So
Do you remember the first one that just kind of rocked you, kind of shook you? Do you even remember?
Oh, well, I'm not sure if I remember the first one. We would get um, children's clothing. We would get diapers. We had like elderly victims, complainants that were in nursing homes. That those were hard. I worked a homicide case fairly early on. So once we're just a quick aside, once we were released for casework, so after our training process, program was over and we had done, jumped all through the hoops and been signed off for doing casework, our lab was really good. Like you just pulled the next case in line. And so like your first case might kind of be like a really simple case, or your first case might be a capital murder case. Um, some labs, I think, saved a lot of those cases for their more senior analysts, but we didn't have that like hierarchy. And so even as a pretty new analyst, I worked this case. I can't remember if it was a capital murder case or not. It's probably not. But it was a mom who had like a toddler, and there were issues with potty training and this child wetting the bed. And the I mean, she was convicted, so I don't know, allegedly, I'm still say allegedly, but the kid was beaten to death with the cord of a vacuum cleaner.
Man,
And
that is such a common
yeah,
weapon, or
yeah,
electric cords.
so it was awful. Um,
Yeah.
and, you know, so yeah, any kind of a child homicide, I mean, sexual assaults were obviously awful as well. Um, and then it was hard too after I mean, I was there throughout the time when, I got married, started a family, had my own kids. Um, those cases became a lot harder to work after I
Yeah.
had my own kids. There were definitely moments where I would pull some evidence and be like, can I swap with somebody? I'm going to put this back in the filing cabinet. Someone else can work it. I just can't. Um, and then there was a homicide case I worked. It was an elderly man. He had, if I remember the story right. Again, a lot of our information is kind of limited, and so things that I remember maybe just are conversations with the detective or information that was in the medical examiner's report. But he was like a retired military guy, but by then he was just like this tiny little, like 80-year-old man.
Really vulnerable.
Yes, he lived in an area of town by himself that was kind of crime ridden, and he saw someone breaking into his neighbor's house, and the police were called, and he testified in that case, and the person went to jail or to prison, and a family member of that guy um, is alleged to have come back and killed him and murdered him. And it was a very, it was the kind of murder you would expect if someone was mad at someone and trying to teach them a lesson. And
Oh, geez.
they just sent everything. And it was a cold case. And so it had kind of been worked, but a long time prior. So by the time it came to me, they were revisiting it. I think one of his nephews was a police officer by then, and it was an unsolved case. And so he kind of brought it back into the foreground of the cold case unit. So they just dropped everything off. And it was, I mean, it was the contents of this little old man's house. And one of the things that he did was he wrote poetry. Ugh. And so there was some letters that were back and forth. I think a family member, like his daughter or sister or something, had taken one of his poems and submitted it to like a magazine. I mean, like, and we're talking like this was in, I don't know, like the 60s or something. Like it's so old, but he had all of this like in a box. And this was not evidence for me, but it came
Right.
in and I had to inventory it. And so I was like, I just shut the door to the screening room and I was reading through it. And it was just so heartbreaking. It was, it was so sweet. His sister had sent it off to be published. It got published. and she surprised him by sending him this magazine. And it was just all these sweet letters back and
Mm.
forth of, and ugh, I didn't find anything. I think the case is still open. They have a good idea of who they think did it, but without any
Really?
evidence, yeah.
So
It,
when was this? When did he die?
gosh, I want to say maybe in the 90s sometime.
So was it before DNA evidence was a
So
thing?
yeah, so we weren't we, like mid 90s is pushing it for DNA testing. And like I was saying, we're able to do a lot with very small amounts of DNA, but early on it required, like, you really needed a blood stain from somebody. And you kind of
Hmm.
needed a single source blood stain. Mixtures of DNA were not great. There wasn't really anything left behind at the scene. I think he might have been like strangled or something. So it wasn't. I mean, it was violent, but it was not bloody. And just
So it's
even,
still open.
I'm pretty sure it is. I mean,
You
like I said,
know, I'm fascinated by some of these groups that they're just online, like mom sleuths and stuff.
I love
Yeah,
them.
like I can see like it, back in the day they'd be so dismissed, but
Hmm.
they
No,
they they do some cool stuff. Like, did you ever see Don't Fuck with Cats?
okay, I know about it, but no. Is it? Is it
Man,
a? Is it a series? Is it a movie? How? What is
it
it?
was a series. It
Okay.
was
Yeah,
like a series, and I mean, it's hard. It's disturbing, but it's all these. I need to watch it again, but it's all these people that they collaborate
yeah. Mhm.
online. They're not all. I mean, some of them I don't even think they meet each other,
Right.
but they all focus on different things, and they get video footage from the casino, and
Hmm.
one will examine the electric socket, the type of vacuum that was in the
Right.
background of this video, and what socket is it, and then was it that guy was really actually just throwing them off. I mean,
Yeah.
it was crazy, but you kind of wonder with some of these cold cases,
Oh, for sure.
could they be solved? Just, I mean, you got nothing to lose, I guess, but that's really sad. That's just really sad. And
Yeah.
I was going to ask you something else. Did you read The Blooding? Did you read that? It was the first. You know what I'm talking about?
No, no. So
Okay,
I'll be
I'm gonna find
honest,
it for
like
you.
my world up until retirement was basically like a whirlwind of wake up, kids, house, family, work, trying to, like, the amount of leisure time I had for much of anything was so diminished. I'm so out of the loop. I mean, I
You
used to
might
watch.
like it.
Okay,
You
yeah.
might like it because it's written by Joseph Wambaugh. He's
Mhm.
one of my favorite authors. He will write nonfiction, but it reads like fiction.
Oh,
This
wow.
was published in 1989,
Wow.
and
Okay.
it's a true crime book. I'll read it to you. Um, Detailing the first murder case solved by DNA fingerprinting, focusing on the 1983 and 1986 rape and murders of two teenage girls. I'm going to Narborough. I'm probably saying that wrong.
Oh, yeah.
England. And
Yeah.
it's so well written. It was, massive investigation.
Yeah.
And it's talking about like they describe how you're getting the samples from people
Mhm.
and trying to explain to people what it's for, and don't be scared, or
Right.
how many people were willfully coming forward to offer their
Hmm.
DNA. It's a really good read. It's not boring. It doesn't read like
No.
nonfiction at all. It's like
Yeah.
a
I
novel.
would
He's a great writer.
I would love to read that, because the story of that is basically like the lore of modern forensic science. Like, we all know the story of that sort of dragnet DNA kind of system where they were just collecting as many men as possible. And wasn't the guy who was ultimately the suspect, didn't he pay somebody? Didn't he have someone go and submit as him?
I cannot remember.
I
Probably
think
that
I
sounds
think
right, but I
I
can't
think
remember.
that's what happened. I think he paid someone to impersonate him and come forward and have a DNA sample collected as him, because even the perpetrator knew that, like, if this science was actually working the way they were saying that it was working, like, he was done. So I think the guy he paid ended up coming forward at some point
Ah,
and being like, actually, I'm not him, but he's over here. You might want to go and
God.
tackle him.
Well,
But I'd love to read like, more details about it for sure. Okay.
it's really good. I think they sampled like more than 4,000
Yeah.
men or
And
people. It's
I
a
and
lot.
the thing is like at that point in time, like how involved the process was, how expensive the process was. Like that was such a just the dedication of resources for that was amazing. So,
And maintaining a database when computers were still, they
oh
weren't
right.
like they are today at
Yeah.
all. You
I
know,
mean,
that's
yeah,
fascinating.
it is
I don't even
fascinating.
know what computers were like in '83, and especially
Yeah.
when law enforcement agencies aren't usually cutting edge on
Right.
the IT, like smaller ones at least. But
Yeah.
it's a fascinating read. So what about so the the sniper, the DC. I don't
Mm-hmm.
hate that name so much because they were sniping. He was actually
Sure.
sniping people, but he's that
Yeah.
scumbag. Did that DNA
Mhm.
really have it? Was that a huge part of? Was he already in the system? Like, did they have his DNA and they could match it and they found him? Do you remember?
So I don't think so. I think it was from the younger, like accomplice kid. I say kid, I mean, I don't know, he's probably a
He was young.
teenager, but a young, I mean, I still want to say 16, 17.
Mhm.
Sometimes, sometimes I don't remember the details, but I remember the sense of, like the age that I
Oh yeah,
believed that he was. So like I'm just gonna say what I remember, but it's more of a feeling of how old he was and thinking that he was quite young at the time. Um, so he, as far as I remember, did not have any sort of previous record that would have landed his DNA in CODIS. And so I think they got a profile, but I don't think it hit to anything. I can't remember how they were discovered. Um, but
the guy, the younger guy, Lee Boyd Malvo was 17.
okay, yeah,
I
that sounds
I
right.
remembered him being younger, but he was 17, and
So,
the man was 41. John Allen
yeah.
Muhammad.
Yeah, I know I can't remember how they were apprehended, but it definitely was a critical piece of evidence to tying the younger one to the scene. And if I remember right, I think they had him testify. Like I don't know if he flipped completely, but I think he was more willing to, given his age and you know, I think police were probably not of the belief that it was his idea. Like he was a part of it, but wasn't the mastermind behind it. So I think he may have cooperated, but I'm sure having
Yeah.
that DNA on evidence definitely from the scene was pretty critical in just linking him to the scene. But I don't think it was how they were identified.
Said I found that's the beauty of like Google and stuff. They someone spotted their car. They were sleeping in the car,
Ah, okay.
and it was I think like the middle of the night, and the guy called the authorities,
Hmm.
and they arrested both of them without incident at 3:15 a.m.
Wow.
They at a Maryland rest stop.
Mm.
They found him
Okay.
sleeping.
That sounds familiar.
Um, he was Malvo, the juvenile. He was sentenced to multiple life terms,
Oh, wow. I guess he didn't get
and
much of a deal.
and Muhammad was executed in 2009. God, that was a
Really?
long time ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. Gosh. Well,
It was terrifying. I remember that. It was because it was just random people. They killed
yeah.
a 13-year-old kid.
Yeah.
I think they killed that a 13-year-old, and people just gassing up their car and stuff. You
Right.
had no idea.
Yeah.
Um, so
Terrifying.
what was a case? What did you what if you can remember? I'm just putting you on the spot. Was there a case that you just remember feeling like victorious and like it's sad, but you're able to celebrate the capture of someone? Like, do you have one that stands out?
Um, so so 2015, 2014, 2015 was like a really crazy year for crimes in San Antonio. We had a guy that was a serial rapist. We had um at least one serial killer happening in San Antonio at the same time. I mean, I was I was looking up some information, the other day, and I was looking at some news articles, and there were so many headlines that I was seeing, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize like how many things were going on at the same time. So there was one case. It was a case involving a number of homicides in San Antonio, and they spanned from 2012 to 2015. But nobody knew about the first one for quite some time. It wasn't linked to the other ones for a while. But there was a great CODIS hit on that case that basically led to a very active serial killer. And I mean, San Antonio has crime, but like, I don't know, we're still sort of like a small, big city. It just, it's not like we're not a Houston,
Right.
or in LA, like I don't know. It seemed unusual that we were going to have that. I mean, I know that we've had them in the past, but five was a lot. We usually don't get to five. Like you might have somebody that kills, two people with some time in between, or two people at the same time, like there's a shooting, carjacking, and two people dead. But I mean, I don't think we consider those serial. Yeah. So this was different.
How did they suspect it was the same killer?
So, so they actually didn't really suspect it was the same killer right away. So the story on this one was there was a homicide in San Antonio of a young girl. I think she was 16 at the time, and she was, I mean, I guess a runaway. She was sort of unhoused at the time, so I think.
This is this
Yeah.
case.
Is it too early? Should I go?
No, because
Okay.
that to me seems like, okay, yeah, your evidence led to the apprehension of this guy and the
Yeah.
identification of this guy. However, it also seems like a quite frustrating case, which you're going to have to explain it. So,
Yeah.
okay. I think she was 15
Yeah.
at the time. Okay.
So,
Do you want to say her name? I mean,
yeah.
it's public info.
Yeah. So these cases, so this one happened in 2014. It was the end of 2014 in December. There was a girl, her name was Natalie Chavez, and her body was found one morning under an overpass in San Antonio. There were indications she had been sexually assaulted. She was partially unclothed. There was a plastic bag over her head. And, there weren't any overt, she wasn't stabbed or shot or anything. I think eventually the cause of death was determined to be strangulation, probably manual, if I remember right. There wasn't like a rope around her neck or a belt, or, sometimes they use, bras or whatever, but none of that. And so evidence was collected on that case, and it came into the laboratory. That one got a lot of attention. I mean, she was a young girl, and so that was definitely different than a lot of the other adult cases that maybe are found deceased outside, for maybe undetermined causes. But yeah, so this one got a lot of attention. The evidence on that one came to us pretty quickly. And, that's the one thing though about the forensic laboratory is that we are getting a lot of evidence. We're not routinely working DNA in real time. So that's one of those things that, you see in the TV shows just because it's convenient, for resolving a show and a case in an hour or, maybe two. But in reality, we would screen the evidence, collect anything that looked like it had the potential for biological testing, and then it basically got put in another line for DNA work. So I think that the time frame between when evidence was collected on this case and when we got a result back was, I think we were in April. So from, we probably got it at the beginning of January. And so January, February, March, April, 4 months. I mean, that's not terrible, but it's definitely not in real time. That case hit in CODIS. So I'll explain CODIS in a minute if you want.
Yeah, do that.
But it hit in our
Yeah.
DNA database, and it matched to a convicted offender sample. And so I'll talk about CODIS here just because it's
Yeah.
important to know about. So one of the other things that I did working in the laboratory is I was the CODIS administrator. I was the assistant CODIS administrator for about 13, 14 years. And then I was the lead CODIS administrator for like the last 2 or 2.5 or something. So CODIS stands for the Combined DNA Index System. It is the FBI's DNA database that operates across the United States. It is contributed to by public laboratories, so not private labs, so not like a pay for work lab. And there's a lot of them, but we're talking like state agency labs, county labs. Some labs still are underneath police agencies, and so those labs would count as well. So and there's a couple different levels of CODIS. You basically have the local level, so those are samples that are worked within the laboratory. So we have our own within our laboratory database of those samples. If a sample meets certain requirements, then it will go up to be searched at the state level. And at the state level, it's searched against samples that also have met that requirement from all of the other labs within the state. If it continues to meet the next level of requirements, it is uploaded to the database at the NDIS or the national level. So there's LDIS, local, SDIS, state, and NDIS, national.
Does that mean where it's maintained or it's analyzed?
Yeah, so there's different samples that can go different places. And it depends, like some of it is legislative, some of it is like, so for a while, some states had arrestee samples and those could be collected within the state. But there wasn't a place for them to go up to the national level. So like you could have an arrestee in Louisiana and legally that state is allowed to collect that sample. But until legislation catches up, maybe that sample isn't at NDIS. Certain partial profiles. So you want to have as much searching as possible. If a sample makes it up to NDIS, it's basically being searched as robustly as possible. And a lot of samples, most samples actually probably are going up to the NDIS level. It's usually things like mixtures, partial profiles. So when you don't have a complete profile, so think of like a fingerprint, if you have a partial fingerprint, there's only so much you can do with it. You can't compare it in the same way that you could if you had all of the loops and swirls and everything. So, there's limited value to it. And it's the same with forensic DNA profiles. So, this guy was a convicted offender. He had a drug arrest. And at the time, I guess at the time of his conviction, which was like 2014, it had to have been a felony. So felony drug cases were allowed or required under state Texas law to have a DNA sample collected from someone convicted of that. So he was in the database, which was great. And he was arrested very shortly after we provided that name to the investigating agency. I don't think they had any real leads on her case. She was not living at home. I think she had been living for a while, maybe with a boyfriend or family friend or something. And I think that they had kicked her out, asked her to leave, so she was just sort of on the street. So the number of people she was coming into contact with, was kind of endless. So I don't think they had any good leads on that. But the DNA hit in CODIS was definitely massive on that one. So they arrested him. The issue was when they arrested him, he was very eager to talk about all of the other women he had murdered. And none of those women were on the radar at all. And so it was a big issue for us in the laboratory because like we couldn't really figure out why. So what happened was they arrested him, brought him in, interviewed him, got a lot of information out of him. And then they went back to these, let's see, there was only evidence on 2 of the other 3 that happened after Natalie, but he was killing in really rapid succession. So
And you didn't have any evidence in the lab on those killings, on those victims that were found in San Antonio.
Right. So I mean, I don't know. I'm a very naive person. I think still.
I find that hard to believe when you work in a DNA lab and everything you've seen, you're naive.
Well, I'm naive. Yeah. There's certain ways that I'm naive. So I kind of was just under the impression that a woman found dead overnight in an outside area of San Antonio with like, I don't know, naked from the waist down. I mean, they're going to be taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. And if there's any indication of a sexual component to a death, they collect their medical examiner's kits, which are vaginal, rectal, oral, usually those fingernail clippings.
Which would make sense when you find someone in that state.
Right.
Disrobed.
Yeah. And so they also would collect some hair samples. They would do like pubic hair combings and head hair combings for any sort of hair transfer. And then they would collect standards from the complainant or the deceased. The way that I assumed that would work was that case, until it was determined otherwise, like that was a natural death. Like in my mind, I'm like, who's going to rule this a natural death? But again, the medical examiners have their workflow. They've got to figure things out.
Wait, you found out that the medical examiners ruled that a natural death?
No. What I'm saying is homicide is only going to have jurisdiction over cases for the most part that are ruled a homicide, right? SAPD is not going to investigate every death that happens in San Antonio. They're going to focus on cases that have been determined, like that are either obviously believed to be homicides and or ruled a homicide by our medical examiner's office. So if a case is not ruled a homicide, if it is ruled, accidental or something, or undetermined. Okay, so what I'm getting at is that a lot of these cases were undetermined means of death. And the reason, so the reason for that was that a lot of them had drugs in their system. A lot of them had mixtures of drugs and or alcohol in their system. And I don't think that the signs of strangulation were as obvious on some of these victims. And so it has been explained to me that sex workers a lot of times will accidentally overdose while in the course of earning their money. And that is not necessarily indicative of the John having murdered them, but that it just happened to happen during the interaction and it's nobody's fault. But they're not going to call the police if their sex worker dies in the middle of everything. They're just going to leave them or dump them or whatever. Yeah. That was how it was explained to me. So this is why I say I'm naive, because that's actually information that I just learned very recently.
Oh.
In my mind, if there is the question of a deceased woman and the evidence was collected just routinely by the medical examiner, like why wouldn't it come to the laboratory? But the answer is the medical examiner is only interested in determining like cause and manner of death, right? They're not investigating the homicide. Like they don't really care who did it. That's the purview of the investigating agency, which in these cases was San Antonio Police Department. several of these deaths were not ruled homicides. They were ruled undetermined. And because they were undetermined deaths, homicide at SAPD never followed up on them, right? They don't belong to SAPD if they're not homicide.
And they didn't bother ordering, I guess it's, a rape kit, most post-mortem. They didn't do that.
There's no criminal investigation until it's assigned to SAPD and it's a homicide case.
But it's undetermined, so it's still a mystery, and there's something to figure out there, it seems. Okay, yeah. It's undetermined. It's not a definite, oh my word. And so her britches were pulled down.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So when they apprehended this guy, and his name is Johnny Joe Avalos.
Yeah.
So when they apprehended him, like I said, I think he confessed to the Natalie Chavez. He didn't really have, there wasn't much, there wasn't anything he could argue on that one particularly. But he told them about these other cases. So what they were able to do was they were able to go back and reactivate or activate for the first time these cases that really had never been under the jurisdiction of homicide. Because now they have a reason to believe that they were actually homicide cases. And so, again, we would hear that there was, a woman found dead overnight in the south side of town. And all of us in the lab are expecting to get this sexual assault kit submitted to us. We're kind of jonesing for it. Because that's a really interesting case. And then it's not coming and it's not coming. And then the news reports another woman found. Definitely, it was one of those situations that definitely kind of frustrated us because, we work with the police, but we do sort of work for them, not in the way that they're our boss or in charge of us, but we have no ownership of these cases, right? Like we are asked to do the work for them to investigate the case. But if they never send a case to us, but we know about it or have an idea about it because maybe there's a news story or someone talks to the medical examiner and they're like, hey, we got another nude woman in downtown San Antonio again. If it's not given to us to do the work, we can't call them up and tell them to send it, and again, their reasoning perhaps makes sense given what they perceive as the, limited resources of the laboratory, limited resources of their homicide detectives. Like there's a part of me that can understand it, but the human side of me doesn't understand it at all. The person who, has family members, like you don't know what their life is going to turn out to be. But I would like to think that if something happened to, a sister, a cousin, a mom, a daughter, that it wouldn't be that they stopped mattering, and so, yeah, that was hard. If someone had called and said, we're struggling with this case, we're not sure, it could have some indications that it's a homicide, like if there had been any question or collaboration or inquiry, like all of us would have said to send it. Every one of us would have said to send it. I will tell you another reason is because it was mentioned that DNA recovered from a sex worker doesn't have value for prosecution because is it there from a consensual encounter? Is it there from the person who killed her? Can you put a time frame on that? And some things you can, fingernail clippings, fingernail scrapings, sometimes you can put a time frame on. You're losing a lot of that DNA when you're washing your hands. People wash their hands a lot, more or less. But sperm does have a retention time in a body. I mean, it's there for a while. So, I assume if you're doing a couple of jobs in a day, you're going to have DNA from your morning job and your evening job present. And, it's just, however, if you were to have sent those samples in and you were to have coincidentally found the same DNA profile across multiple women who also were found deceased in a very similar manner within a month or two of one another in the same part of town, that would have been a pretty good indicator to me that you had someone who was involved in all of those. So I will tell you the time frame of these because they started to escalate a lot, and thankfully it was right around the time that we were able to get the CODIS hit. So Natalie Chavez was found right around the end of December. I think I saw like a grand jury indictment that said the 18th, but the information I have is the 23rd of December, 2014. The next one was found January 12th of 2015. So 2 weeks. The next one was not until April 4th of 2015. And the last one was April 25th. So, I mean, and then the April 25th was the last one because somewhere right around then we issued the CODIS letter indicating that he was matched to the case, and they arrested. Natalie was first, but because of the time frame, the time that we needed in the lab to work her evidence, generate a DNA profile, put it into CODIS, get the hit, verify the hit, and report it, it took from when we got her evidence probably in January until April. So he gets picked up end of April, confesses to these ones in the interim. There's not a way that we wouldn't have been able to probably stop these other ones, but we would have been able to tell detectives in not real time, in a shorter amount of time, that there was a commonality between this. And here's what's so crazy is I remember, and I looked so hard for this article and I can't find it. I can't remember if it was an interview, so if it was in our print newspaper or if it was an interview and so on our news. But several of the women that were also sex workers in the same area, because they're in kind of groups, I mean, they're not immune to understanding that it's not a safe business to be in. Had seen what they told police in this interview. Well, they weren't talking to the police. They were talking to an interviewer. But I would have hoped that the police might have talked to some of these ladies. But they were like, it was the same guy. They were like, we saw him with Celia and we saw him with, Genevieve or, I don't know which ones they were, but these women were publicly saying it's the same guy. And turns out that they were right. Did they have information? Like, could you have gotten information about like what he looked like, his car license plate number? I mean, it just was very sad. It was just very sad that it wasn't treated the same way. Like you said, if a housewife was found like that. So Natalie was in a different area and she wasn't really involved with these ladies, but those, so the one in January and the two in April, somewhere in that time frame, they at least two of them had happened. So it may have been before the last one, or it might have been after the last one, but there was an interview going on. And the reason for that was, it was clear that there was something happening. Like these deaths were, and they may not have been determined to be homicides because of, what was in their system as far as drugs and alcohol. But it was clear that something was going on. I mean, either drugs were laced, and this was way before like fentanyl or anything like that, or there was maybe somebody killing these women. And so the same article, I wish I could have found it. There was mention in it about a serial killer in San Antonio. And again, serial killers in San Antonio, not really a thing. Like, it was just, someone might kill a couple of people, but it was usually not like this scenario. And they interviewed our police chief at the time, who was like, there's definitely not a serial killer in San Antonio. And this guy was a serial killer And we also had another active serial killer. So not only did we have one serial killer, we actually had two.
Thank you for listening to Dark Minds, Shattered Lives. I'm Deborah Dobbs, and until next time, trust your gut and know your exits.